The lock snicked open with a familiar click, and the door to the Conroy residence swung inward. Early Conroy stepped into the silent foyer, his leather briefcase landing softly on the polished hardwood floor. The sound startlingly loud in the emptiness of the house. He loosened his tie, fingers unsteady, as he registered the absence of the usual welcome, no embrace from Susan, no scent of dinner wafting from the kitchen. Susan, the word echoed, unanswered. His salt and pepper hair, usually so meticulously styled, fell across his forehead as he wandered through the rooms. Each space was expectant, filled with the negative space where Susan should have been. Her car was gone, and there was a chilled stillness that settled heavily upon the house, like an unwelcome guest. Early's footsteps were measured as he ascended the staircase, his hand trailing along the banister, the wood cool beneath his touch. In the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, he found her personal planner splayed open on the nightstand, its pages a testament to order and control, now marred by scribbles and crossed-out appointments. He leaned closer, the faint lines of worry deepening around his eyes as he traced the inconsistencies with a tentative finger. Meetings at odd hours, appointments in places Susan had no reason to visit, and gaps of time unaccounted for. Returning downstairs, Early's gaze caught upon something half hidden beneath a stack of mail, a receipt from a nearby town, the date stamp fresh. A cold seed of doubt took root in his chest, spreading icy tendrils through his veins. With a sense of foreboding, he pulled on his coat and stepped out into the encroaching dusk. The drive was a blur of red taillights and long shadows, the world outside tinted with the shades of suspicion. The address on the receipt led him to a neighborhood cloaked in the respectability of manicured lawns and hushed streets, but to Early, each house seemed to hold its breath, complicit in the secret it kept. There, parked carelessly in front of Will Thompson's house, was Susan's car. Its presence was a stark confirmation amidst the creeping vines of doubt. Early's hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he stared at the vehicle, the sight of it igniting a slow burn of anger in his gut. He couldn't tear his gaze away, the image searing into his memory, Susan's car, and what it implied, a manifestation of betrayal. It was as if the darkness gathering around him had seeped into the very fabric of his life, coloring everything with the hue of deception. "Damn it," Susan murmured, the words a whisper lost in the void of his car. Early wrestled with the decision to confront the scene before him or retreat into the cold comfort of the unknown. The choice hovered, immense and oppressive, in the tight space of the driver's seat. With a heavy heart, he turned the ignition off, the silence of the night wrapping around him like a shroud. The only thing left was the haunting question that lingered in the dark, the why of it all. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed a harsh, accusing red in the darkness of the room. The numbers flipped to 12:03 a.m. as the front door creaked open downstairs. Early Conroy sat up in bed, his body rigid with anticipation. The familiar sound of keys clinking onto the foyer table pierced the silence, followed by the soft shuffle of Susan's footsteps. Early, her voice floated up the stairwell, tinged with surprise. "Up here," he called out, his tone taut with restrained emotion. Susan ascended the stairs, her silhouette emerging into the dim light filtering through the bedroom door. A flicker of tension crossed her features before she schooled them into a composed mask. "You're home early," she said. Her words wrapped in cool detachment. "Couldn't sleep," Early replied, the lie sitting heavy on his tongue. He studied her face, searching for any sign that might betray the truth he feared. "Where have you been?" Working, Susan's gaze drifted away, avoiding his probing stare. Will Thompson needed to discuss a business deal. It ran late. "Is that all?" Early's voice was steady, but the weight of his suspicion hung between them like a tangible thing. "Of course," she answered too quickly, a flicker of irritation flashing in her eyes. Why would there be anything else? He wanted to believe her, to accept the explanation and let the doubts slip away into the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. But the inconsistencies in her planner, the receipt, the late hours, it all gnawed at him, relentless as the ticking of the clock. "Your meetings with Will always seem to run late," he observed, his words laced with skepticism. "And your car parked outside his house. What am I supposed to think, Susan?" She sighed, a sound of exasperation, or perhaps weariness, he couldn't tell. "I can see how it looks, but you have to trust me," she implored, stepping closer. The faint scent of her perfume, usually a comforting presence, now seemed foreign and intrusive. "Trust is earned," Early countered, the shadow of doubt hardening in his mind. And lately you've been keeping secrets. Please, just tell me the truth, he interrupted, his plea softening into vulnerability. He watched her, every word, every gesture under scrutiny, as if he could peel back the layers of her composure to reveal what lay beneath. Nothing happened between Will and me, Susan insisted, her voice laced with a quiet desperation. It's been all about the deal. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air between them, uncertain. Early looked at her hand, at the slender fingers that had once woven seamlessly with his own, and felt a pang of sorrow for the intimacy they had lost. In its place stood a chasm of uncertainty, filled with shadows that whispered a betrayal. Then why do I feel like I don't even know you anymore? His question hung in the stillness of the room, unanswered. The afternoon sun was already sinking, casting long shadows across the kitchen tiles as Early stood by the window, phone in hand. He watched a solitary leaf fluttering down from the maple tree in the yard, its descent slow and almost purposeful. The world outside carried on, unaware of the storm brewing within the walls of the Conroy home. Early, my boy, Maggie's voice crackled through the receiver. Talk to me. He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. I'm not sure what to think anymore, Mum. It's Susan. She's hiding something, and I can't shake this feeling. Feelings aren't facts, Early, Maggie reminded him gently. You must tread carefully. I know, his voice was a low murmur, as if speaking any louder would shatter the fragile peace of the room. But her planner, her late nights, and now a receipt from Highbridge. Highbridge, Maggie's tone shifted, a note of concern threading through. Isn't that where Will Thompson? Yes, Early cut her off, the word like gravel in his mouth. And I found texts, intimate ones, between them. Early, you need to talk to Susan. Open communication is the only way through this. I've tried. He turned away from the window, the dying light casting an amber glow across his face. She says it's just business. Then maybe you should speak with someone who might know more about this business. Have you thought about reaching out to Jennifer? She's always been honest with you. A sigh escaped him, mingling with the scent of coffee that lingered in the air. I'll try. After another round of motherly advice and assurances, he ended the call. The silence that followed felt oppressive, heavy with the weight of the unknown. With a sense of trepidation, Early dialed Jennifer's number. The line clicked, then buzzed, a lifeline extending into the maelstrom of his doubts. Jennifer Stevenson speaking. Jen, it's Early Conroy. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time, Mr. Conroy. Her voice held an unmistakable warmth, a stark contrast to the chill settling in his bones. No, not at all. What can I do for you? Can we talk about Susan? Off the record. There was a brief pause, a hesitation that hung in the air like a delicate cobweb. Of course, Mr. Conroy. What's on your mind? It's her involvement with Will Thompson. She insists it's strictly professional. Absolutely, Jennifer affirmed quickly, perhaps too quickly. They've been working on securing a crucial deal for the firm. It's been demanding a lot of her time. Is that all it is? Jen Early asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Conroy, Susan values her career. And she values you. She wouldn't jeopardize either. Thank you, Jen. He hung up, unconvinced, his heart drumming a rhythm of nagging uncertainty. Turning to Susan's open laptop on the desk, Early's gaze fell upon the glow of the screen, where messages still lingered, half hidden in shadow. The cursor blinked, inviting him to delve deeper. With a deep breath, he moved the mouse, scrolling through the text exchanges with Will. Can't stop thinking about last night, one message read. Neither can I. Tomorrow can't come soon enough, Susan had replied, the words blurred before Early's eyes, a scolding betrayal seeping through the pixels. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing through the emptiness of the house. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window pane, a man adrift in a sea of deception, grappling with the tides of trust and suspicion that threatened to pull him under. Early paced the length of his study, each step measured and deliberate. The room, once a sanctuary of solace and deep thought, now felt like a prison cell, its walls closing in on him, filled with the haunting echoes of Susan's laughter and whispers intended for another. He moved through the dim light, fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound books that lined the shelves, their tales of intrigue mocking his own too real predicament. He stopped at the window, peering into the ink-black night, as if it could offer some guidance. The darkness outside mirrored the turmoil within, a motif of his unraveling trust. He had always prided himself on his ability to discern truth from lies, yet he found himself caught in a web of suspicions he couldn't untangle. "Where are you, Susan?" he murmured to the void beyond the glass, her absence a tangible weight in the room. The silence of the house was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional creak of settling wood. Early felt his resolve hardening. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. Will Early greeted, his voice steady as he stood on the threshold of Thompson's well-appointed living room. Will's gaze met his, green eyes reflecting an unspoken understanding. "Early, this is unexpected," Will managed, the charm in his voice subdued by the gravity of the situation. "Can we talk?" Of course, Will stepped aside, allowing him entry. The space between them was charged with tension as they settled into opposing armchairs. The room was cast in shadows, the low light from the table lamp highlighting the contours of Will's face, a map of concern and caution. "Is there something going on between you and my wife?" Will Early didn't waste words, his question direct and laden with accusation. "Early, listen," I will started, hesitating. "Please," Early interjected, his plea wrapped in weariness. "Just the truth." "All right," Will exhaled, leaning forward with elbows resting on his knees. "I won't lie to you. There are feelings, emotional ones. But it's not what you think. We haven't crossed that line." "Feelings," Early echoed, the word tasting bitter. The admission brought no relief, only a swirling mix of anger and sorrow. "And these late nights? The texts? How am I supposed to believe?" "Believe what you need to," Will cut in, his tone earnest. "But know this, nothing physical has happened. Our connection. It's complicated." "Complicated," Early repeated, his mind racing to piece together this new revelation. It was a sliver of truth in a sea of lies, or so it seemed. "Early, whatever's happening, Susan loves you. Don't let your doubt destroy that." "Love," Early said softly, rolling the concept around in his head like a puzzle he couldn't solve. The word felt foreign now, its meaning distorted by the shadows creeping along the edges of his consciousness. "Thanks for your honesty," Will Early said after a moment, rising from the chair. His movements were automatic, betraying none of the confusion that gripped him. "Early, where will you go from here?" Will asked, concern etching his features. "Into the dark," Early replied, glancing back with a hollow smile. "It's where all the answers hide." He left Will's house feeling none the wiser, the night air cold against his skin. The stars above blinked indifferently as he walked alone, the quiet streets a reflection of his solitude. With each step he felt his heart retreating further into isolation, a fortress built to shield him from the pain of betrayal. Yet even in his retreat, the questions multiplied, gnawing at the edges of his resolve, leaving him adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The sound of a key turning in the lock pierced the stillness of the house. Early sat motionless on the worn leather couch, the dim light from a solitary lamp casting shadows across his face. He listened as the door creaked open, followed by the soft click of Susan's heels on the hardwood floor. "Early," Susan called out hesitantly, her voice a mix of relief and apprehension. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the muted glow of the hallway light. "Here," he replied, his voice terse. The word hung between them, laden with the weight of unspoken accusations. Susan approached, taking tentative steps into the living room. Her eyes searched his, seeking an entry point through the invisible barrier he had erected. "I didn't expect you to be up," she said, her tone attempting warmth. "Couldn't sleep," Early muttered, his gaze fixed on an indeterminate point beyond her. "Can we talk?" The plea in Susan's voice was almost imperceptible, but Early caught it all the same. It tugged at something inside him, but suspicion held firm, its grip cold and unyielding. About what his question came out sharper than intended, echoing off the walls. "About us, Early. I hate this distance between us." She moved closer, reaching out to touch his arm. He recoiled subtly, the gesture widening the chasm that had opened up in their marriage. "Us," he echoed hollowly, the word tasting bitter. "Is there still an us?" "Of course there is." The desperation in Susan's voice cut through the air. "I love you. This thing with Will, it's not what you think, isn't it?" Early stood abruptly, the energy of his movement causing Susan to step back. "Every time I look for honesty, I find more lies." "Early, please." Susan's plea broke off as he strode past her, heading toward the stairs. "I'll be in the guest room," he stated flatly, each step carrying him further from her. "Early, don't do this," she implored, her words trailing after him like leaves caught in the wind. But he didn't turn back. Instead, he closed the door to the guest room behind him, sealing himself away from her attempts at reconciliation. In the darkness of the room, he lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling where shadows danced like specters of doubt. Trust, once the foundation of their life together, now seemed a relic of a time before deceit had crept in. He must have drifted into a fitful sleep, for he was roused by the shrill chirp of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. Groggily, he reached for it, squinting at the bright screen in the gloom. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Conroy." The voice was distorted, a deliberate rasp masking its owner. "You don't know me, but we have a mutual acquaintance, Will Thompson." "Who is this?" Early's voice was sharp, every muscle tensing. "Names aren't important," the caller continued. "What matters is that Susan is being blackmailed. Will is involved, yes, but not in the way you think." Blackmailed, the word jolted Early, a surge of adrenaline chasing away the remnants of sleep. "Listen carefully," the voice urged, urgency threading through the static. "They are protecting her career. There are documents, evidence. You'll find everything you need if you know where to look." "Wait, what kind of evidence? Why are you telling me this?" But the line went dead, leaving Early with the echo of the caller's final words. In the quiet aftermath, the room felt colder, the shadows deeper. He sat up, processing the revelation. Anger had been a constant companion, but now it was mingled with a confusing blend of sympathy and bewilderment. If Susan was a victim, what did that make him? With a heavy sigh, Early rose from the bed. The darkness seemed to press in around him as he contemplated the tangled web of secrets and lies. Trust, betrayal, suspicion, they were threads woven into the fabric of his life, obscuring the truth that lay hidden just beyond his reach. Early stood at the threshold of their bedroom, his silhouette almost blending with the dim hallway beyond. The only light in the room came from the muted glow of a bedside lamp, casting shadows across Susan's figure seated on the edge of their bed. Her hands lay folded in her lap, the veins prominent against the pale skin, a physical manifestation of the tension that filled the space between them. "Tell me it isn't true." Early's voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of desperation. He sought to find the familiar comfort in those blue eyes, but they were like turbulent seas now, dark and unreadable. Susan lifted her gaze, her lips parting slightly, as if to let out all her secrets. "It is true," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung heavy, suffocating the last remnants of denial he clung to. Blackmail, the question seemed absurd, even as the word tasted bitter on his tongue. Early had prided himself on being able to read people, to gauge their intentions, but his own wife had become an enigma. She nodded solemnly. "I thought I was protecting us." Our future. Susan's explanation seemed to dissolve into the thick air, her deep blue eyes now glistening with unshed tears. "Will's business was failing, and he threatened to take everything we have." Early felt his fists clench at his sides, the tailored fabric of his suit straining over his knuckles. This room, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, now echoed with the resonance of betrayal. He tried to process the information, tried to understand how the woman before him, poised and elegant even in distress, could have been coerced into such a deceitful corner. "By supporting him, you lied to me," he stated, the hurt evident in his tone, mingling with the underlying anger. It was a declaration, one that pulled at the seams of their bond. "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. "And I'm sorry, Early. I'm so sorry." The silence that followed was oppressive, punctuated only by the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Early's eyes scoured the room, resting on the framed photographs of happier times, the contrast stark against the present turmoil. "I need to think," he managed to say after a moment, his voice strained with the effort to keep composed. He turned away, the decision heavy in his chest, the idea of separation looming like a specter in the once warm corners of their home. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded too final, leaving Susan alone with the weight of her confession. In the stillness of the night, Early walked toward the comforting presence of his mother's house, each step echoing the chasm that had formed between him and Susan. Maggie's door opened before he could knock, as if she'd sensed his arrival through the bond they shared. Her silver hair glowed like a halo in the porch light, her eyes reflecting worry and compassion. "Mum," he murmured, stepping into her embrace. "Come in, my boy," Maggie said, her voice soothing as she led him inside. The warmth of her living room enveloped him, the familiarity a stark contrast to the cold uncertainty he'd left behind. "Talk to me," she prompted gently, her hand resting on his arm as they sat together on the couch. "It's Susan," Early began, the words spilling out alongside his doubts and fears. "She's been blackmailed." Maggie listened intently, her face etched with concern. Early, she sighed, reaching out to cradle his hand. "What will you do?" "I don't know," he confessed, feeling the foundation of his world shift beneath him. "I can't trust her right now, and without trust, what do we have?" "Sometimes," Maggie said softly, her thumb brushing over his knuckles, "trust must be rebuilt, piece by piece. But it takes both willing to pick up the pieces." "Can I?" Early questioned, the darkness of doubt flickering across his features. "Should I?" "Only you can answer that." "Love," she replied with gentle wisdom. "But whatever you decide, know that I'm here for you." As the conversation drifted into the night, Early grappled with the magnitude of his decision. The theme of trust reverberated through his thoughts, interwoven with the painful sting of betrayal and the gnawing suspicion that had taken root in the darkest corners of his heart. Early's heart pounded with a mixture of trepidation and resolve as he sat in their home office, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The night had crept in, its darkness pressing against the windows like an uninvited guest. Susan sat opposite him, her deep blue eyes reflecting the same steely determination that had compelled him to make this choice to fight for their marriage, to face the blackmailer together. "Are you sure about this?" Early asked, his voice low and steady, despite the storm of emotions brewing within him. Susan nodded, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "We can't let them win, Early. We can't let fear dictate our lives." The click of the front door announced the arrival of their allies in this clandestine operation. Jennifer entered first, her bright eyes scanning the room before settling on Susan with a reassuring smile. Detective John Miller followed, his leather jacket creaking with each deliberate step. The detective's presence brought with it a sense of action, a promise that they were moving from the shadows into the light. Evening Miller grunted, acknowledging the couple with a nod. "You ready to do this?" "We are," Early replied, feeling a flicker of confidence. Susan reached out and squeezed his hand, a silent message of unity. "Here's the plan," Jennifer said, unfurling a set of blueprints across the desk. "We've traced the blackmail demands back to an office downtown. Detective Miller and I will be stationed outside. Once we confirm the targets inside, Susan, you'll go in." Susan's voice held a hint of surprise, but not fear. "Your presence might throw them off guard." "Give us the element of surprise we need," Miller explained, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Once they're caught," Early interjected, "we'll finally know who's behind all this." "Exactly," Jennifer affirmed, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And we'll have enough evidence to put them away and clear your name." The plan was simple yet fraught with unknowns. They would lure the blackmailer with the promise of another payment, only to trap them between the meticulous mind of Jennifer and the seasoned instincts of Detective Miller. "Let's do it," Susan said. Early admired her courage, felt it seeping into his own veins, fortifying his resolve. The hours passed slowly, each minute stretching into eternity as they waited for the signal. Early watched Susan, her silhouette poised and graceful, even in the tension-filled room. She was a pillar of strength, and he drew from that strength, letting it bridge the chasm of mistrust that had formed between them. Then a soft buzz broke the silence, their cue. Susan stood, smoothing out her sophisticated attire, preparing to step into the lion's den. Early's chest tightened as she left, her departure leaving a void that echoed with whispers of doubt. Time crawled by until, at last, the sound of footsteps approached. The door swung open, revealing Jennifer's triumphant expression and Miller's stoic nod. "Got him," Jennifer beamed. "And there's more documents in the office suggest a bigger conspiracy against your company, Susan." "Conspiracy," Early repeated, the word hanging heavy in the air. "Seems someone's been orchestrating this whole mess to take down your business," Miller added, handing over a thick envelope filled with evidence. "But now we've got a lead." As they pored over the documents, Early felt a shift within him. The darkness of suspicion was still there, lurking in the corners, but the act of standing united with Susan, facing a common enemy, began to kindle a new light, a light of partnership and shared purpose. "Thank you, both of you," Susan said, her gratitude genuine. "This is far from over, but now we have a fighting chance." "Always glad to help," Jennifer said, her relief palpable. "Let's take this one step at a time," Miller advised, ever the voice of reason. As the detective and Jennifer took their leave, Early turned to Susan, seeing her not just as his wife or a woman ensnared by blackmail, but as a partner in life's battles. They had captured more than a criminal. Tonight they had begun to capture back a piece of themselves, a fragment of trust that could grow strong once again. "Whatever comes next," Early said, reaching for Susan's hand, We'll face it together. Together, Susan echoed, a soft but fierce promise in the dark. Early stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the sun dip below the horizon, bleeding vibrant hues into the ocean. He felt Susan's presence beside him, a silent testament to the vows they were about to renew. The air was cool, tinged with salt and the scent of wildflowers that grew in abundance along the rugged coastline. "Are you ready?" Susan asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though afraid to disturb the sacredness of the moment. He turned to face her, taking in the sight of her dark hair swept up against the evening sky, eyes reflecting the last light of day. "I've never been more certain of anything," Early replied, his own voice steady, but his heart thrumming with a mixture of nerves and resolve. A simple wooden arch adorned with white lilies and ivy stood as their altar, the sea their witness. They stepped forward, hands entwined, and began to speak the words that would bind them once more, this time with a deeper understanding of what those promises meant. "I vow to be honest, even when the truth is uncomfortable," Early declared, his gaze locked with Susan's. "And I promise to listen," she countered, "to truly hear you beyond just the words." As the last light of day surrendered to the stars, they sealed their vows with a kiss that spoke of second chances and hard-won faith. The darkness around them seemed less daunting now, held at bay by the shared light within their renewed commitment. In the days that followed, they attended their first couples therapy session together, a room awash with soft beiges and the quiet hum of a sound machine mimicking a babbling brook. It was a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions they had weathered. Dr. Martin, with her gentle demeanor and probing questions, guided them through the murky waters of their past, encouraging them to lay bare their fears and doubts. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, Doctor," Martin reminded them, "but every step taken together is a stone laid in the foundation of your future." Outside of therapy, they found solace in shared activities, small things like cooking dinner or taking evening walks through the neighborhood, where the streetlights cast long shadows on their path. Each step, each word, each glance was an exercise in rebuilding, a deliberate effort to weave their lives back together. "Remember when we used to argue over the spices?" Susan said one night, a playful glint in her eye as they prepared a meal. "Hard to forget," Early chuckled, recalling the petty squabbles that now seemed so trivial. "But I think I've developed a taste for your level of spicy." "Good," she replied with a satisfied nod. "Because life without a little spice is just bland." They ate under the soft glow of candlelight, not just sharing food, but also stories, laughter, and patches of silence that no longer felt heavy with unsaid words. Afterward, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, gazing up at the constellations scattered across the velvet sky. "This feels like a new beginning," Susan murmured, leaning her head on Early's shoulder. "It is," he agreed, his arm tightening around her. "We're learning to navigate in the dark, together, finding our way by the trust we place in each other." The motif of darkness no longer held the same power over them. It became a canvas upon which they could paint their new story, one of transparency, communication, and a love that was learning to shine again. The clink of fine china and the murmur of conviviality filled the Conroy dining room, a chamber that had witnessed both silent treatments and heartfelt conversations. Candles flickered on the polished mahogany table, casting a soft glow on the faces gathered around it, their features softened by the light, unmarred by shadows. Each guest brought with them an aura of warmth, their presence a testament to the resilience of relationships weathered by storms. Early stood at the head of the table, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, the tailored lines of his suit a familiar armor, now stripped of any pretense. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the candlelight, refracting it into a spectrum of commitment stretched across the table. "To trust," he began, his voice steady, but imbued with a depth that only those who have lost and regained could truly understand, and to the journey back to it. Here came the chorus of agreement, glasses chiming in harmony. Susan sat beside him, her elegant posture and the serene set of her lips belying the rigorous path she had trodden to sit here tonight. In her deep blue eyes, the reflections of flame danced like the stories she harbored, tales of betrayal turned into lessons of love. "Remember the time we almost cancelled our anniversary trip over that silly misunderstanding?" she offered to the group, her tone light, but her gaze anchored in the gravity of the memory. "Misunderstandings," Maggie, a stalwart friend seated across from Susan, chimed in. "They're like knots in a necklace, aren't they? You need patience and care to untangle them without breaking the chain." Laughter rippled around the table, a shared acknowledgement of the delicate work required to keep bonds intact. "Communication is the gentlest tool for such work," John Miller, whose detective's mind had been crucial in their recent trials, added thoughtfully. Without it, even love can become a silent adversary. True, Early said, his voice a soft echo in the room. And when you're navigating through darkness, that communication becomes your only guiding light. His hand found Susan's under the table, their fingers intertwining a silent vow renewed amidst a crowd of witnesses to their growth. Darkness has a way of making us appreciate the dawn, Jennifer, whose youthful optimism had often been a beacon for them, observed. Her words carried the weight of hope, a fragile yet fierce force that had sustained them all. Speaking of appreciation, Susan interjected, raising her own glass with a grace that defied the tremor of emotion in her voice. To all of you who stood by us, who believed in the dawn even when we were lost to the night. Your trust in us helped rebuild ours in each other. A chorus of affirmations filled the room. And as the dinner progressed, the air became thick with anecdotes, laughter, and the occasional reflective silence. The evening was less about the food and more about the feast of experiences being shared, a communal digestion of the past's bitterness transformed into the sweet aftertaste of reconciliation. As the night wound down, the guests filtered out with hugs and promises to gather again soon. With the last goodbye said, Early and Susan faced the remnants of the celebration, the scattered crumbs, the half-empty wine glasses, the dimming candles inching towards their end. Today was perfect, Susan whispered, her hand still clasping Early's. Perfect because it was real, he agreed, looking not at the disarray but at the woman beside him, the partner who had traversed the chasm of mistrust with him. Together, they had found their way back to each other, guided by a mutual dedication to mending what had been frayed. Let's clean up in the morning, she suggested, a yawn punctuating her words. Let's, he echoed, as they made their way to the sanctuary of their bedroom, leaving the darkness of the dining room behind, confident in the knowledge that light would come with the dawn. Morning light spilled through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow over the room as Early and Susan sat across from each other at the breakfast table. The remnants of last night's celebration were cleared away, leaving behind only the intimate space where their plans for the future would unfold. Remember the garden we always talked about, Susan began, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Her voice was tentative, yet hopeful, as she ventured into their shared dreams. Early's eyes lit up with recognition. The one with the stone pathway and wildflowers on either side. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, bridging the physical space between them. That's the one, she affirmed with a nod. I think it's time we made that a reality. Let's do it, he said, his tone decisive, banishing the lingering shadows of doubt that had haunted their conversations in the past. They spoke of the colors they'd plant, blues and purples for serenity, yellows for joy, reds for passion. Each flower a testament to an aspect of their journey, a symbol of the growth they sought both in the earth and in themselves. Maybe we could add a bench, Too Early suggested, picturing the two of them sitting side by side, enveloped by the fruits of their labor. A place to sit and reflect, Susan agreed, her eyes meeting his. To talk, or just be together. As the morning stretched on, they sketched out ideas, each line drawn on paper, a commitment etched deeper into their hearts. They envisioned a trellis archway at the entrance, a welcoming gesture to all who would enter their sanctuary. Every plant in this garden will represent a challenge we've overcome, Early said, his words wrapping around Susan like a warm embrace. And every new bloom, a hope for the future, she added, her gaze steady and bright with promise. Their conversation wove a tapestry of possibilities, from the mundane to the profound. They planned vacations, discussed revisiting neglected hobbies, and even broached the idea of starting a joint venture, a small business that would blend Early's negotiating prowess with Susan's entrepreneurial spirit. Something local, Early mused, envisioning a venture that would allow him more time at home, less time lost to the demands of travel. Something meaningful, Susan echoed, yearning to pour her energy into something that would touch lives directly, create ripples of positive change. As they continued to talk, the kitchen filled with the fragrance of fresh coffee and the warmth of shared laughter. Their plans became more than idle dreams. They were blueprints for a life rebuilt on the foundation of hard-won trust. Whatever happens, Early said, reaching across the table to clasp Susan's hand, we face it together. No more secrets, no more shadows, no more darkness, Susan affirmed, squeezing his hand in return. We step into the light together, and their planning session culminated in a quiet moment of reflection, the world outside their window alive with the hum of daily life. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the community that had rallied around them, a network of support and friendship that had proven unshakable. Thank you, Early whispered, not just to Susan but to the universe that had conspired to bring them back to this point. Thank you, she echoed, her heart swelling with gratitude for the second chance they had been given. Together, Early and Susan faced the horizon, where the rising sun promised new beginnings and the twilight of their past struggles gave way to the clarity of day. They held on to the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the love that had endured, ready to cherish each day as partners, as allies, as soulmates.